attempts as a nation to get to space was for a smaller, trivial goal to beat the Russians, it has now bloomed into much more. We would have never been able to accomplish landing on the moon without these first essential steps to get there, the first step being Project Mercury. Project Mercury was a space exploration project spreading from May 1961 to May 1963. There were 6 different shuttle flights, each flight consisting of 1 crew member. Alan Shepard, who was the astronaut on Freedom 7, was born on November 18, 1923, and died on July 1, 1998. Aside from being an astronaut, Alan was a naval aviator, test pilot, and businessman. He was the first American to travel into space. He went to the U.S. Naval Academy and studied and earned his bachelor's degree of science. May he rest in peace. Gus Grissom, born April 3, 1926, manned the Liberty Bell 7, which was tested for human safety by Ham, a chimpanzee. He was also a Project Gemini and an Apollo program astronaut. He served in World War II and the Korean War, and he was chosen by NASA for his experience with flying planes in the Air Force, as well as his mechanical engineering background. His flight on Liberty Bell ended quite badly, as we will go over later. He died unexpectedly on January 27, 1967, during a pre-launch mission for Apollo 1. His official cause of death was asphyxiation. May he and the other astronauts on Apollo 1 rest in peace. John Glenn was born on July 18, 1921 in Cambridge, Ohio, and he was the astronaut on the Friendship 7 shuttle flight. Like Shepard, he also received a Bachelor of Science degree in engineering from Muskingum College in New Concord. He was a U.S. Marine Corps from 1943 to 1965, and he was a colonel. He died on December 8, 2016. He was the final living astronaut for Project Mercury. May he rest in peace. Scott Carpenter was born on May 1, 1925, and died on October 10, 2013. In 1965, Scott Carpenter spent 28 days living on the ocean floor off the coast of California as part of Sea Lab 2. Carpenter attended the Navy General Line School in Monterey, California in 1957, and then the Naval Air Intelligence School at NAS Anacostia in Washington, D.C. He served in the Korean War and was the 4th American in space on Flight Aurora 7. May he rest in peace. Walter Schirra was born on March 12, 1923, and died on May 3, 2007. He was an American naval aviator, test pilot, and NASA astronaut. Before becoming an astronaut, Schirra graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree from the United States Naval Academy in 1945 and served at sea during World War II. In 1948, he became a naval aviator, served as a fighter pilot, and flew 90 combat missions in the Korean War, and then in 1958 he graduated from the U.S. Naval Test Pilot School. Schirra retired from the Navy in 1969 with the rank of captain. He was the first astronaut to go to space 3 times and was the only astronaut to have flown in the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs. In total, Schirra logged 295 hours and 15 minutes in space. May he also rest in peace. Gordon Cooper was born on March 6, 1927 and died on October 4, 2004. He was an American aerospace engineer, test pilot, and Air Force pilot. Fresh out of high school, he enlisted in the Marine Corps. He left for Parris Island as soon as he graduated from high school, but World War II ended before he saw any overseas service. He was assigned to the Naval Academy Preparatory School as an alternate for an appointment to the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis, Maryland, but the primary appointee was accepted and Cooper was assigned to guard duty in Washington, D.C. He was serving with the Presidential Honor Guard when he was discharged from the Marine Corps in 1946. He became the first American to spend an entire day in space, the first to sleep in space, and the last American launched on an entirely solo orbital mission. After serving as backup commander of the Apollo 10 mission, he was superseded by Alan Shepard and retired from NASA and the Air Force with the rank of colonel in 1970. The Mercury space capsule was produced by McDonnell Aircraft and carried supplies of food, water, and oxygen for about 1 day in a pressurized cabin. Mercury flights were launched from Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida on launch vehicles modified from the Redstone and Atlas D missiles. Inside the shuttle, it was a very cramped space with lots of buttons and had a decent sized window so astronauts could look out to see where they were. Each shuttle had a max speed of over 17,000 miles per hour. Early spacecrafts were called capsules because of how small they were. The first flight, named Freedom 7, launched on May 5, 1961, and was the first United States human space flight. The overall goal was to put a human into orbit and return him to Earth safely. The astronaut on this flight was Alan B. Shepard Jr., and the mission was successfully completed. The second flight, named Liberty Bell 7, launched on July 21, 1961, was a flight that gave NASA a real scare. All was going really well. Astronaut Gus Grissom had gotten into orbit and headed back down to Earth. Liberty Bell had landed into the Atlantic Ocean, and the plan was for a helicopter to latch onto the spacecraft with a hook. But at that moment, the hatch blew off the spacecraft and water began pouring into it. He had his helmet off and had rolled up the neckband to keep water from getting down his spacesuit, but had forgotten, or did not have the time to, close the oxygen vent in his suit torso, the attachment point for the capsule oxygen supply. The water that made its way into the spacecraft made the spacecraft too heavy for the helicopter to lift, making the overheating engine light come on, forcing the helicopter to unhook. However, this caused Grissom to sink, and water leaked in through the oxygen inlet, and he got lower and lower in the water, and Grissom came close to drowning. Fortunately, he surfaced, and the helicopter lifted him out of the water. 30 years later, in an expedition to recover the spacecraft, they found Liberty Bell 16,000 feet deeper than the Titanic was. This flight was originally tested by Ham, a chimpanzee, who also had issues upon resurfacing and landing in the ocean. The third flight that the United States tested was Friendship 7, launched on February 20th, 1962. This one, being manned by John Glenn Jr., was the first orbital flight being tested in American space travel history. The mission lasted approximately 5 hours, finishing at about 4 hours and 55 minutes to orbit around the Earth 3 times. The feat made Glenn a national hero. Everything went well and he was brought back to Earth safely. The fourth flight, Aurora 7, launched on May 24, 1962, was an experimental flight completed by Scott Carpenter. The goal of this mission was to make astronomical observations, visibility and flying observations, Earth photography, and medical checks. We also attempted to observe a flare fired from the ground, but it was unsuccessful. He orbited around the Earth 3 times, and this mission also lasted about 5 hours, clocking in at about 4 hours and 56 minutes. The fifth flight was flown in spacecraft Sigma 7, and its purpose was to test how well the spacecraft operated for future long-term missions. This flight had been the longest lasting so far at 9 hours, 13 minutes, and 5 seconds, completing 6 orbits around the Earth. It proved the integrity of the spacecraft, although the Soviet Union beat us to the record. The launch was delayed because of issues with the boosters as well as a faulty temperature controller in Walter Schirra's pressure suit. The mission was a success in terms of the ability of the capsule to perform well, except not many scientific results were recorded. The final flight, Faith 7, flew from May 15th to May 16th, 1963, and the astronaut on flight was Lieutenant Gordon Cooper. This flight was the longest of all 6 flights, clocking in at a time of 34 hours and 19 minutes. The flight achieved an astonishing 22 orbits. This marked the end of Project Mercury experiment, yet started a whole revolution around space travel. Project Gemini started 2 years later, and just 6 years later we brought humans to the moon. You can find all the shuttles from Project Mercury at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, Illinois. We have come a long way with space travel. Elon Musk has a company that designs and makes spacecrafts. People talk about space travel for leisure, as well as someday being able to live on another planet. Project Mercury paved the way for many new opportunities in our country's space exploration career. The project set a possibility to set a foot on the moon, and it showed us that space is not as unreachable as we may have once thought. While there is still a lot to learn about space and space exploration, you have to give credit to Project Mercury, the one that started it all.
No, no!
Well, it looks like we reached the end of our project. We hope you enjoyed and research more if you want to learn more about Project Mercury and other space travel.
I love it.